and a spot for her easel and her paints. Shit, he was getting ahead of himself again. The touch of her hand against his chest grounded him, reminded him where they were, right here, right now. Sneaking between their bodies, she gave a tug at the topmost button of his vest. Where they were, right here, right now, was getting undressed. Rising up on his knees, he tore the rest of the buttons loose, sending one pinging off the wall as its stitches gave beneath his over-eager hands. He got it off and threw it aside. Wrinkles be damned, anything but getting all of him pressed skin on skin to all of her could fuck the hell off for now. His shirt and watch followed, and suddenly she was sitting up, one delicate paint-stained hand sliding over the front of his slacks, lips level with his hips, and he just about lost his mind. He reached down to grab her wrist, too hard. She flinched and darted her gaze up to his. Forcing himself to loosen his grip, he closed his eyes and held her there, soaked in the warmth of her through the fabric. "Sorry," he gritted out. She wriggled her hand inside his hold, and it sent more spasms racing from his dick to his balls and all through him. "Is this all right?" "More than." Slowly, reluctantly, he let go. His pulse thrummed, his throat tight. "I've just wanted this for so long. Wanted you for so long." One of her brows quirked up. Her voice rose right along with it. "What a crime, you being so neglected like this." That was a smirk, flirting with her lips. Because he'd said those words 3 hard-earned climaxes of hers ago, when she'd been on a hair trigger, flushed, desire-hot, and desperate for him. He smiled, an aching, raw thing that had no place here. "Don't let it go to your head." "You know, I think I just might." Unencumbered, she tucked her fingers into his belt buckle and gave it a questioning tug. At his nod, she worked the leather through the metal. She left it dangling, unfastened at his hips, as she undid the fasteners and dragged the fabric to his thighs, taking his boxers along for the ride. His cock, screaming for her hand, her mouth, anything, sprang free, and the sudden lack of constriction had his eyes rolling back in his head. As if from outside his own body, he watched as she trailed a single fingertip from the gleaming crown all the way to the base, where she finally gripped him, angled him toward her mouth. "Kate, fuck, don't tease me." But she did exactly that. Tilting her head to the side, she examined him, and there was a barely veiled wonder to her expression. His chest expanded. "You see what you do to me?" His voice came out gruff as he felt inside. "I thought it was only me." She caught herself as soon as the words were out of her mouth, glancing up like she'd surprised herself, admitting that. He reached out to cup her cheek, fingertips gentling her jaw, and he wouldn't push. But she was so close, her lips perfect and pink and full. She licked them, and another hot drop of fluid beaded at his tip. "Will you?" he asked. And who'd have known she had it in her? She was still the same girl he'd taught to touch herself in front of him, still easy to blush when he talked about her pretty cunt, but it was like seeing her superimposed on herself. A time-lapse image, and there were changes. There was this new hint of a sex kitten to her mouth, and it filled him with pride and terrified him at the same time. It was only barely dawning on her, but she knew better now the power she had. She'd taken his lessons to heart. She was using them against him, and fuck, he couldn't wait to see where she would go with them. Gaze fixed on him, she leaned in, darted her tongue out and took a soft, glancing stripe of a lick, wet and warm and centered right along his slit. "Kate." With one hand she held him, and she took him just barely inside the heaven of her mouth. He bared his throat, letting his head fall back. Then, with her other hand, she skated up his abdominals, fingers threading through the coarse hairs on his chest. Her palm came to rest above his heart, where the absence of his father's ring was still a presence he could feel in his bones. She pressed right there, while with the same breath she hollowed her cheeks and sucked. It was like being turned inside out. She was touching his heart, newly freed, and taking him in, giving him this. He let her go on for almost a minute before the pleasure started to gather. He grabbed her by the hair and had to remind himself to be careful. As he drew her off, she let him slip from between her lips with a wet sound that made him twitch harder. "What do you want?" he asked.